Okay, great, we're recording. So thank you everyone for being here to this special topics webinar that addresses issues of cooperative management, leadership, and governance, hosted by the International Center for Co-op Management out of the Sobey School of Business at St. Mary's University. We are in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, the unceded and never surrendered territory of the Mi'kmaq people, Mi'kma'ki. And I'm Erin Hancock. I'm the program manager for education for the center. Out of the center, we also do convenings and knowledge dissemination as well as research. And you can find more about everything that we do, all the courses that we offer, symposia, projects, working papers, recordings of our past webinars, all at managementstudies.coop. And we're also having another free webinar next month, which you'll be able to register for from that website as well. I'll put some of these items in the chat as well. So I wanted to thank Nazik Beishenaly for being here today, joining us from across the pond. And thank you so much for your work that had us know about these projects and know that you were a good one to bring into our loop. So the webinar today is called A Broader History of Cooperation from Europe to the World. And some of our goals today is that we want to consider some of the lesser discussed roots of cooperation globally, that we want to think beyond Rochdale as the predominant narrative, although an important narrative in cooperative history. And that we want to look at the global links from what was happening in Europe to eventually what was happening internationally as well in terms of a formalized co-op model. And this information today is linked to some open source curriculum. We'll have Nazik speak more about that, curriculum that you all might want to consider using yourself. And I think at this point, I'll pass it over to Nazik. Feel free to tell us more about you, your work, the center. And thanks everyone. I'll be watching for your questions in the chat.
Thank you very much, Erin. Dear all, it's a great pleasure to be here with you today and discuss cooperatives. Special thanks to the International Center for Cooperative Management, Sonia and Erin, for organizing this. And for the invitation. This is a great platform. So a couple of words about myself. My name is Nazik Beishenaly, and my interest in cooperative started with my PhD many years ago. I worked notably on the role of credit cooperatives in international development, and I did my PhD at Grenoble Alpes University. After that, I worked in broader policy advisory area in developing countries with the national government and the UN agencies, and especially in Kyrgyzstan, where I originally come from, where I was also elected the president of the National Union of Cooperative Movement. And today I live in Belgium. I'm reconnecting with academia, and currently I work at the KU Leuven Center. So of expertise for cooperative entrepreneurship, and also I'm the research advisor at the International Cooperative Alliance, where I advise on the measuring the impact of cooperative, the contribution of cooperative to the sustainable development goals. So here is a very brief presentation of our center. You have also the link in the chat if you want to visit our website. So also my interest in the history of cooperative has been part of my PhD work. It took shape when at KU Leuven we started working on the development of teaching and education materials within the EU-funded Co-op for Edu project. And we were responsible for the part of developing the module on historical and conceptual foundations. And instead of just copy-pasting existing information, we decided to take it as an opportunity to reflect once more on the origins of cooperatives and channel a few ideas. So first, probably in these ideas I would like to present and to discuss with you. There are lots of things to say, but hopefully we will be I will manage to present everything in a nutshell. So one of the ideas we wanted to channel is that cooperation is intrinsic to human nature and social interactions, and therefore cooperative organizations existed in diverse forms in different parts of the world. I'm currently reading a book of Paul Collier and John Kay entitled Greed is Dead, which discuss actually the fact that humans are naturally prosocial, or I'm citing here, our human nature has given us a unique capacity for mutuality. A healthy society is a vast web of cooperative activities sustained by mutual kindnesses and obligations. In fact, human being is can both cooperate and compete, and we can cooperate constructively to create complex webs of social and economic relationships. In his other book, The Future of Capitalism, Collier says that cooperative movement was grounded in those normal moral instincts and emphasized that reciprocal obligations built by the cooperative movement has drawn on the values of loyalty and fairness, linking rights to obligations. So we would like also to question validity, I mean, in the context when these rational choice theories are being questioned, we would also like to question the assumption that led cooperatives to be marginalized by economic theories as a second best organization. Second, it was also an opportunity to showcase the diversity of the forms of cooperation, emphasizing its heterogeneity and complexity. Cooperatives are not organizations that we can put in one basket, as they represent a diverse world composed of different regional, sectoral experiences, but also organizational, entrepreneurial forms. Their history shows that actually they can function and adapt to various political systems and economic sectors, and still they remain viable businesses. And third, despite the fact that cooperatives can be represented by a large variety of organizations, we however emphasize the fact that cooperatives share common values and principles. And here I joined the idea that ethical principles that are expressed by the ICA principles of self-help, trust, reciprocity, community, democratic governance, but also the promoting education and autonomy of cooperative organizations should also inform the legal basis for cooperatives. Otherwise, we already had the history of cooperatives that had a history of cooperation that was basically centrally planned cooperation. And I also come from the part of the world where we have organizations that are called cooperatives, but which do not necessarily comply with these founding principles of cooperation. So here I would like to, I will be presenting the history of cooperatives in 5 stages, and I will be focusing today on 4 of them, on the 4 first of them. So I will be first discussing the traditional forms of cooperation, emphasizing the fact that as I said, it existed everywhere. And second, I will discuss the period of institutionalization of cooperatives. And I will, as the history of cooperative is difficult to break from its conceptual and theoretical foundations, I will also introduce to the debate of that had in the 19th century and that had impacted the cooperatives development in the 20th century. So as you see, we have very large bulks of information, and I will try to present them in 30 minutes. So as for the traditional forms of cooperation, cooperation is intrinsic to human nature. Cooperation was therefore something natural to the organization and social interaction in all societies of the world. We in our teaching materials, we reference the different cases of early forms of cooperation, such as Eranas in ancient Greece. Eranas actually means a common meal where everyone contributes. The term also refers to an interest-free loan from friends to relatives. Borrowers, as mentioned in Socrates' writings, can also form an runners club. Money is collected by one of the members of the circle or by a third party who hands it to the borrower. We also reference the cases of Tanomishiko in Japan, which were locally organized social finance schemes that exist since 12th century. Although some authors argue they appeared earlier, where each member would contribute a sum at regular intervals and would receive a single payment when their turn came around, where mutual trust was crucial. We all know the experiences of tontines in Africa. We all also know the form of cooperation in the Arab world, which is called Tuiza, which is based on the principle of mutual aid among family, neighbor, clan members who benefit from pooled work in turn to work together on the harvest, seasonal work, house construction, rendering each other services. Although forms of cooperation existed all over the world, the modern forms of cooperatives were institutionalized in Europe in the 19th century in the context of transformative changes induced by the Industrial Revolution. So we know the history of the Industrial Revolution, how it emphasized the cleavages between rural and urban, rich and poor, changing the social tissue and creating issues of price increase, poverty, worsening conditions of working population, and which engendered also risks of popular upheavals, where cooperatives became one of the solutions. And in that context, in the UK, we are very familiar with the experience of consumer cooperatives in the United Kingdom, the Rochdale Pioneers, which gathered in 1844 to found a store for the sale of their produces. And for us, it represents a symbol of cooperative movement. Also, there were in parallel many other attempts of institutionalization of different forms of cooperatives in Europe. So just to cite few, in Germany, in the post-Austrian Austro-Prussian War was also propitious to the development of different models of cooperatives, nurtured by different ideas, by the Catholic social views of Raiffeisen, by the liberal traditions of self-help promoted by Schulz Delitzsch, member of Prussian National Assembly from the Progressive Party, by the socialist concepts of Ferdinand Lassalle, within the agenda of General German Workers' Association, which later became Socialist Workers' Party of Germany. In France, after lifting the prohibitions such as Allah Decree Chapelier law against associations and coalitions by the decree of Napoleon III in 1866, it also gave a surge to workers' associations. In the Netherlands, we all know the first forms of agricultural cooperatives, which were established by farming communities and supported by local dignitaries. And it gave also to one of the first cooperative legislation, specifically in the area of agricultural produce processing and purchase. So the second stage, the second stage of the institutionalization, so we divided it in two. So the first one, we consider that Europe was the cradle of cooperatives, but during the second half of the 19th century, cooperative models started to be exported in different parts of the world. Community leaders, political activists such as Alphonse Desjardins from Canada were crucial in extending the model to their countries. And we have also referenced lots of examples how the model was exported to different parts of the world, creating symbiotic model, a different model, which was both inspired by the European model, but also was conditioned by the local context. So to cite few, in India, for example, we have the examples of how it's under the initiative of the British government that the cooperative credit begins to spread in India. England, first trade partner of India, was very interested in the agricultural progress of this country. And we have information of Sir Wedenborg and Mr. Ranade, who submitted in 1882 a proposal to the Indian government on the development of cooperative banks according to the European model. Similar experiences existed in South Korea, in Japan, in which, for example, credit unions were one of the founding basis for the whole for the Japanese cooperative movement. Also in Africa, for example, and I think we have the honor here of I saw the name of Patrick de Veltre, who is among us, who has worked a lot also on African cooperatives. And indeed, although cooperation existed in African traditional societies in the 20th century, they developed often as top-down government-led policy initiatives to support farmers and their access to credit. For example, in Kenya, cooperatives were favored by the state policy of land redistribution in 1960s. Land bought out from the Europeans were transferred to local populations, and cooperatives represented convenient form for organizing farming communities. Similar experiences existed in post-socialist countries where the land distribution, the state-owned land had to be redistributed among the farmers, and cooperatives represented one of the most adapted form of farming organization. However, remaining narratives of collectivist forms of cooperation still hinder their full-fledged development. So we have very different stories of cooperation all over the world, and these are just few of them. We also, so the idea was just to present the heterogeneity, the diversity of experiences. And we also wanted to introduce students to the conceptual narratives, theoretical narratives on cooperatives, because they are often discussed in relation with the socialist concepts of socialist socialism, Christian socialism, social liberalism, solidarism, philanthropic traditions that become source of social and solidarity economy. And here I'm citing De Fourny, 2017. His book on social and solidarity economy. Socialists considered cooperatives, in fact, as a path to the new moral world. And we all know the communitarian experiences of Owen, Saint-Simon, Buchez, Fourier, to cite just few. However, although they played an important role in conceptualizing cooperatives, we also introduce another perspective to the cooperatives, which is quite known, but probably less than their socialist associationist origins. So in parallel with socialist interpretations also existed, cooperatives also existed in the liberal traditions of the economic thought of the 19th century, even if this fact is relatively less examined. In fact, John Stuart Mill, Marshall, Pareto, Leon Walras discussed cooperatives as self-help organizations fully compatible with the principles of market economy. In the classical economic thought of the 19th century, cooperatives were attributed secondary role, which was mainly linked to the workers' situation. So just few citations that I found interesting. So Mill, for example, 1848, thought that for the Owenist and Fourierist projects to take place, not on theory, but in practice, a vast improvement in human character must be presupposed. Large-scale communitarian economic systems contradicted for him the human nature in such community. Every individual would need to acquire a higher degree of disinterestedness and freedom from vanity and irritability. For Marshall, 1890, there can be two types of men: those with strong self-interested and individualistic temper, and those whose character is better adapted for business in a private firm or public company, while cooperation has a special charm for those in whose tempers the social element is stronger. For Walras, 1865, the existence of cooperative and private societies is not related to the difference in the character of men, but rather to the differences in the socio-economic situation of the working men. Those who lacked capital for establishing an enterprise had to become a member of a cooperative. In private business, capital is formed in an immediate and definite way, while in cooperative, members form their capital gradually from their small savings. So here we wanted to contrast the idea that cooperatives were also part of the economic, of the classical traditions of the economic thought until they became marginalized within the neoclassical organizational theories a bit later. So in 20th century it was quite challenging to put in one slide. So just to cite the whole idea. So from very grand idea of cooperative republic, we migrated to like smaller sector for cooperative sector, and from cooperative sector to cooperative enterprise. But today with social and solidarity economy, it opens a new chapter for cooperatives. And also in the 19th century, one of the debates on cooperatives concerned their success to be independent self-help organizations. And this continued for a while in the 20th century as well. For example, Lassalle questioned the capacity of cooperatives to rely on their internal resources. If they do so, they would remain small-scale, unproductive, and low-profit organizations, while they had potential to bring positive wealth and large-scale benefits for community if they accepted the state support. In fact, state, as I'm citing him, is the association of population and has a moral duty to intervene as a regulating power. So Lassalle's views conflicted with his contemporary politician, Schulz from Delitzsch, who, as a leader of the Liberal Progressive Party, actively supported credit cooperatives movement, being convinced that no state help is needed, but small savings of their members. Lassalle thought that state help was more important than self-help, positing that the state was the greatest association of the working class. So in the 20th century, we still had this debate, and the outcomes of this debate still continue to impact cooperatives in many ways. Today in Europe, cooperatives are recognized as part of the social and solidarity economy, and by the new law adopted by the European Union in 2018. It renews the interest in cooperatives and their conceptual foundations. In fact, we know that cooperatives that abounded in early 20th century economic textbooks disappeared in the second half of the 20th century. And the main reason was a shift of the paradigm from institutional to neoclassical analysis. There were some attempts to integrate farming cooperatives in the neoclassical analysis as non-stock, non-profit organizations, as a firm but with particular features, as an excess of contracts, but these initiatives remained few and did not influence economic textbooks. In the main mainstream economic teaching, cooperatives were considered as the second best organizations compared to capitalist firms. Cooperatives, however, continued their activities, showing resilience of their business model. Cooperatives thus navigated through different historical contexts and theoretical concepts, and received different ideological connotations and different schools of thought. Today, when there is a shift in the paradigm from rational choice theories to more interdisciplinary approaches to human decision-making, it is probably necessary to review the role of cooperatives in broader context. Their history and existing narratives continue to impact their function in terms of creating an enabling policy environment, integrating them in international development programs, including the Sustainable Development Goals, as full-fledged local development actors, also teaching them at universities and supporting their development by creating an appropriate regulatory and legislative framework. So today we could perhaps start discussing or continue our discussion how cooperatives could find their place in this new paradigm. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nazik. I think that you have certainly pointed to a number of things that are fresh for many of us here on the line. And I wondered if we can open it up. So far, we don't have any questions that have come through in the chat, but we can open it up for people to ask questions. You can voice questions. You can turn on your videos if you'd like. And also people can share about their own regions as well. If you have interesting co-op histories in your regions, whether that is formalized or more informal cooperation, we definitely like to hear that. I think it could add to the storyline today as well. Okay, Lori Cook asked, wondering if someone could speak to history of co-ops and importance of folk school movement. Is there anyone here who can speak to the history of the folk school movement? Nazik, is that something you're familiar with?
I know that there are some school cooperatives in the road. There are, but I think there are more cases of cooperative universities, but I'm not particularly familiar with the folk school movement, but I will be very curious to learn more about it.
And also curious how we reach out to more diverse communities going forward. Absolutely, that was part of the motivation for our center to start taking a wider analysis in things like these public conversations and webinars, is because too often we default to the dominant wider European histories and ways of explaining and seeing cooperative and conceptualizing cooperative theory in practice. And so I share in that, Lori. Oh, great. And actually, Kathy Stats has just posted a link
just
there.
a little link there. Yeah, I don't know a lot about this, but I'm quite intrigued by it because I know there are connections from the Danish folk school movement through Highlander, that folk school effort here in the US. And then I know that there was a lot of commonality between kind of how folk schools really wanted to celebrate, you know, the kind of empowering people's connection with culture and community right at the center of their both enterprise and kind of social connections. And I know, for example, that in the Farmers Union Cooperative Education Program, our earliest youth camps at the national level, before we purchased and built our national camp facility, a couple of those years back in the 30s, those national cooperative education Farmers Union summer camps were hosted at folk schools in Minnesota. So there's some interesting connections there. I just don't know a lot more than that.
Great. No, thank you, Kathy. Appreciate that. And I think it's worth asking folks too, in terms of in your regions or in your sector, what have been sort of the underpinnings of the emergence of cooperatives there? Has it been sort of visitors moving about in the world, sort of sharing these cooperative models? Has it been out of a religious movement? Has it been government initiated? You know, we see a lot of things that stir up cooperative activity, whether informal or formal. Or is it sort of culturally inculcated in terms of people being naturally co-reliant on each other and more apt to be collaborating? So feel free to add that to the chat or unmute. I see that Lori Cook has raised her hand. Please go ahead, Lori.
Hi, yeah, I just, I feel like the folk school movement is an important part of the history of cooperatives. I mean, Denmark was the originator of it. It spread to Canada in the form of the anti-Ganesh movement. Certainly the Catholic Church was very principal involved in making that happen. I'm always, and I'm familiar with the Highlanders folk school in the US as well. And to what I know, and please correct me, anyone, if I'm wrong on this, but I feel like the two movements, the cooperative movement and the folk school movement, were really powerful together. And we've kind of lost that in some way. And I don't, and my sense of the folk school movement now is that cooperatives are not as much at the core of what they focus on. And I think it would be really interesting to see if there's, to understand more about the history of the two movements, to also see how it could inform maybe bringing the two movements together again.
No, excellent contribution. Thank you, Lori. Absolutely. Yeah, and looking at these parallel movements and sister movements that very much shape the trajectory of co-ops regionally and internationally is fascinating, and also can point to where we have weaknesses, or you know, the real breadth or depth of the directions that our systems take, I suppose, in their development.
Yes.
I think the role of leaders as well, in terms of the tone that they set, however you define leaders. But please, Nazik, go ahead.
Yes, it's just, it's probably a bit on a different topic, but still related to education. We're currently conducting a research at the International Cooperative Alliance, and it also, all these context of aligning cooperatives with the objectives of sustainability, which allows also to say how well it is actually already aligned. It also allows us to pinpoint some activities that cooperatives already do without really emphasizing them. And one of their contribution is really on education of their members, as universities and schools, they generally don't offer courses on cooperative entrepreneurship of business in many countries, especially in developing countries. Cooperatives assume that role of providing VT and like technical education to their members. And I think they also contribute to the education of their, not only of their members, but of the community, investing in their community development. So I think there should be more research, more interest to the role that cooperatives play in the area of education. Now, it will definitely look to folk school movement. That sounds very interesting.
Wonderful. Well, Nazik, I'm glad that we taught you something today, because you come with so much knowledge and shared so much interesting information with us. I'm glad that there's a spark for you in something else that can be investigated after. Oh, great. We've got a number of questions coming, and I wonder if folks want to voice their questions. Apostolos, did you want to start by voicing your question, or shall I read it? It's nice to get people's voice and to hear people introduce themselves and tell us where they're from too. I apologize if I've said your name incorrectly. Okay, I can go ahead and read it. In which degree, at which degree did the colonization affected the international expansion of the co-op model in the rest of the world? And what other factors affected the international expansion? It's the role of colonization.
I think that this is very, probably a question that has to be investigated, not only from the perspective of cooperative, but like from broader post-colonial studies and like anthropological studies, because indeed, I think it has cooperatives contributed. I mean, cooperatives, as I briefly mentioned, the cases of Japan and India, they were exported to these regions as part of the economic and trade policies of and arrangements between the governments, because it allowed to, for example, for the Great Britain, it was an opportunity to organize agricultural production that could be eventually open new trade opportunities in their country or in the European world. So it definitely played a very important role, and it also played a role in somehow in biasing probably perceptions of cooperatives as a government-led initiative, because it was very often, it was in many countries, it is still part of the government programs and policies, and it's very difficult always to put the line where it can be considered like as a normal support to the business sector and of governments to support like SMEs and other enterprises, and where is the limit of this intervention, and where the principle of autonomy of cooperatives can be compromised. So, for example, we know in some countries today cooperatives are established and funded and managed by the government, and because historical conditions were such, I think it's more easily accepted. So I think that that's also a question to reflect on in order to decide what are the cooperatives. I mean, whether they are like or perhaps to accept that they have a diversity of forms, and it's okay to have different ways of cooperating.
Thank you. I wonder if maybe I'll just flag what's on the screen so we can, in a moment here, stop sharing the screen so that more people can maybe show their videos if they'd like. So just to highlight, in this series, we do have one more free webinar coming up in March 24th. You'll see it there, hosted by folks representing a major international research project on youth involvement in cooperatives and youth entrepreneurship as well. So I know a lot of us talk about youth engagement and succession planning in the co-op sector. And so this is concrete international research project that's just being released. So fresh data on that. And we're hosting 3 of those researchers next month. So if you go to managementstudies.coop, you'll see the way to register for that. I'll send that out after this session as well. I'll drop it in the chat as well. And just to highlight that we did a number of webinars, some of the most recent are listed there, and those recordings are on our website as well. And okay, so Nazik, if you want to stop sharing your screen, and if more people want to show their video now, you can feel free to do that. And oh, great. And we have a number of new comments and questions coming in. So I wonder, Patrick, did you want to speak now? You're asking if you can react, please do.
Okay, thank you, Erin, and thank you for this great initiative. You hear me?
Yes, please, and please do introduce yourself as well.
Okay, I'm Patrick from University of Leuven, so I'm a colleague of Nazik, and I did quite some research on cooperatives in the global north and the global south. Also on the effect of colonialism on the cooperative scenery, mainly in Africa. So I would like to say a few words about that, because what we find even today in Africa still is very path dependent and has very much been determined by what has been the kind of model that was exported to Africa. So in the British colonies, we would see what I have called a cooperative sector model, very much similar to the British system of cooperatives. In the French colonies, we could find a more social economy model where cooperatives were associated with mutuals and foundations and associations. In the Portuguese colonies, we would have the producer cooperative model, and then the Belgian colonies, what I have called a social movement model, whereby there's an explicit link with trade unions and farmers organizations. And up to today, you will see that the cooperative sector in the African countries is very much still organized on those lines. In fact, the post-colonial states have replicated the system that was introduced by the colonizer. And one of the most important elements in this was that the governments and the state agencies had a kind of patronizing role vis-a-vis the cooperatives. So cooperatives are listening, and in some countries still are listening much more to what the government is saying them what to do than they are listening to their members. So I think that is very important to realize when we look at the cooperative sector. And I see that Osiame is also looking at that. In many cases in colonial times, but still today, you see that for the state and for governments, cooperatives is seen as a mechanism, as an instrument for social control, and to orient the economic, but also the social activities of the population or certain segments of the population.
Thank you for contributing that. Very helpful context.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Indeed, he's very knowledgeable on cooperative history in Africa, and I think it's great to have his feedback here.
Great. Osiame, did you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Nazik the question that I asked in the chat about if she's written her findings up in a paper, because my research approaches cooperative histories and theory from the post-colonial and decolonial tradition. And so I'm viewing the cooperative, rather viewing the pre-colonial communal arrangements as the fact of cooperatives that the colonial legal framework excluded from recognition, excluded from legal recognition because colonialism. So yes, I'm very interested to I saw Nazik has done a lot wider work than I've already done in looking at non-European origins. So I'm very much interested in looking in more at other places beyond. My main focus has been Africa, but I'm interested in looking in other places. You mentioned Japan and all those other places. And yeah, I guess that was my contribution.
Thank you very much. So far, I don't have any published paper on specifically on cooperative history, but we're working, probably there will be something published or presented at least on the conceptual origins and how on the current narratives of cooperation and how it's been impacted by its history. I would strongly advise to cite the papers of Patrick de Veltre, who is the expert on African cooperatives, and you probably do. I would also advise to have a look on our open resource materials. We give a very long list of references that can be very useful for you. I personally, maybe I can say, specialize more on Soviet countries, which has also a different story to tell. But on the region of your interest, I think you will find lots of references in our teaching materials, and I'm happy to exchange if I can share the references or resources.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I do cite Patrick quite heavily, and yeah, glad to have you on this call. Glad to have you on this call, Patrick.
Wonderful, thank you. And I'll just note that in the chat, Karen has posted a link to a short history of cooperation by Ed Mayo, who used to lead up the UK cooperative system. A great free PDF that speaks to some of the threads certainly that were raised here today beyond just the Rochdale narrative. So that's a great thing to check out if people want to come back and refresh themselves on this, or share it with others who want to dig deeper into the history. So we have a few folks who have been contributing in the chat, and just for the benefit of those who view the recording later, I wonder if some of those folks want to bring their voices into the room. Maybe Zoe first, if you'd like. If you want to introduce yourself and share your comment.
Oh, thanks, Erin. Yeah, my name's Zoe Creighton. I'll start my video. I'm coming to you from Nelson, BC, in the traditional territories of the Sinixt and Ktunaxa, and happy to be here. Very, very interesting. My work in co-ops is although one day maybe it'll involve an academic component, it's very kind of grassroots. So my comment was just in response to what I think you had asked, Erin, was just tell us a little bit about what the roots of cooperation in your region are. And what I am interested in is in finding out what makes some places hotbeds for co-ops and others not necessarily. And I understand, learning from Nazik about the trends and the movement and the all of those components. And I've just kind of in the chat just identified what in our zone in rural BC, what we have kind of teased out as why this part of BC is seen as kind of a hotbed of co-op activity and has been for the last 75 years. So that was just my addition in response to your question, Erin.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and it's amazing. Zoe, it's like within a block or two, there's how many co-ops? What's that figure that you throw around? It's unreal. It's like co-op after co-op.
Yeah, I think there's 16 when you walk down 4 blocks of the main street in our town of 10,000. It's pretty dense.
Well, I'm learning more than I telling yes, I think, because I didn't know about Russian Duho wars and America back to the land war resistors. Wow. So many stories around cooperatives that are that still need to be told.
We have talked about doing a study tour to Nelson, BC, to look at cooperatives there. So stay tuned if we ever end up putting that together.
We will welcome you.
Great, awesome part of the world. Good people. Okay, we've got about 8 minutes left before the hour, and I know Eric had added into the comments, which Eric, if you want to introduce yourself and share, that'd be great. And Karen on deck.
Sure, thanks, Erin. I'm Eric Tusking, and I'm in Sackville, New Brunswick, just near Erin, about 2 hours or so from Halifax. I teach a cooperative development course for the organization called Co-op Zone, and I found this this particular lecture in Nazik very, very helpful, just to expand my understanding of the history of cooperatives. And I thought I was fairly well educated, but you really broadened it out, and I really appreciate that. The comment that I made also in the chat was with regard to the work that Jessica Gordon-Neighbor did with regard to the African Black American cooperatives. And she uncovered a lot of rich history of cooperatives that had just been buried. We've forgotten about it. We've ignored it. We've marginalized it. And I wanted to know if there were other areas of the world that you've identified that you're not able to share in this presentation today. The questions or the comments from Patrick and Nazami, that they were really helpful to expand that. And I'm just wondering if there's other areas too that just need to be lifted up and remembered.
Thanks, Erin.
Thank you very much. I think it's, thank you for your kind words. One of the definitely areas where we still have so many stories to tell. I think it's in Central Asia, also Russian cooperative movement, and like Eastern European cooperative movement. They have been more told than the Central Asian cooperative movement. And although they are still in nascent stage, the very first cooperatives actually, for example, in Kyrgyzstan, were brought by Czech settlers. And I'm currently looking at it, and it's very amazing how in early 20th century, Czech farmers and like entrepreneurs came all the way to the cold mountains of Central Asia to develop agribusiness through cooperatives. And of course, the region has also has been impacted by the cultural by the cultural history of the Soviet Union. And today, when it is developing, there is practically no information on the world's cooperative movement. And being there, we have to explain that cooperatives are not like collective farms, they are an existing businesses. There are and very basic information about the principles, and it's barely translated in Russian. So there is a really huge lack of information because of linguistic and cultural barriers. And I think there are, in this sense, it's lagging behind the Asian and African regions and other parts of the world. But I think every region has its own characteristics and features.
I know Erin said I could go next. I'll try to make this quick. I was taken by your slide number 4 that had the arrow and the bubbles underneath, where you talked about since 1970s cooperative enterprise and social and solidarity economy. When I saw that, I thought, that's not how I feel it is in North America. Like, I don't feel that it is at all really the mainstream cooperative sector narrative to talk about the social solidarity economy. However, that is what we are talking about through our center and trying to see it in that way. It was more of an observation, maybe both on the conversation since, where the history and the more recent history in particular is so context specific. It's so specific to where you are and how things have emerged over time. And so I looked at that and thought, is that, perhaps more true to certain parts of Europe? As you said, social solidarity economy being sort of enshrined in the EU, and we're quite far from that way of thinking still in North America. So it was maybe an observation, and then just, again, reflection on the challenge of trying to have even a picture like that ever to be representative of the history of the cooperative model globally, because it does seem to have evolved and continues to evolve so differently in every place.
Thank you very much. I think it's it would be the perspective you saw on the 4th slide. It's a perspective from the conceptual, how concepts went on. It doesn't mean that there were in practice a republic. Actually, maybe I should have emphasized that. But the concepts evolved from this grand vision of cooperatives to smaller and smaller. But today, I think some more efforts are being put in place by the European regulator in order to support cooperatives, perhaps not because they are cooperatives, but because my feeling is that because it's part of a larger social and solidarity economy, and there are indeed, there is a legal and regulatory framework now in few policies that are supporting. We also see some EU-funded and European government, national governments funded projects that support cooperatives, mainly from the standpoint of to support their capacity, basically, of employment generation and creating jobs for the youth. So it's probably coming. I'm staying positive about it. And also I would say that perhaps one of the biggest issues of the cooperative movement, because they represent a certain profile of members, which are often represented by rural communities and people who have difficulties of making salient their policy issues. And also they are like quite squatted movement all over the world. But I think the ICA is doing an amazing job to building this capacity for expressing and supporting the ideas and the needs of the movement. But as it is a global movement, and although there are some large cooperatives that support the Alliance as a member-based organization, this umbrella organization, I think there are so many cooperatives that have difficulties with for contributing with the membership fees in compared to other like lobby-based other business associations. So I think these particularities of cooperative unions and federations, they still impact their capacity of making themselves salient for the regulators. And but with the SDG agenda, and I think there have been a net increase in the visibility of cooperatives and social enterprises and social and solidarity economy.
Thank you. Wow, thank you, Nazik, for your everything today, for your responses, for your presentation, for all of the work that led up to that. And again, to remind folks that this is stemming from preparations that were done for what's now available open source curriculum on cooperatives that, of course, open source, insinuating that you all can access it. What I'll do is I'll send a follow-up email to everyone with the link to the recording, as well as the links that went into the chat today. So, so you'll have all of those to go see and perhaps use some of the curriculum. That's certainly the intention. So thank you very much, Nazik, for sure, to your partners at the center, to everyone else who contributed and offered your reflections and questions and your own knowledge today too. I think we co-created this, at least this half hour was very co-created by everybody here, and that feels extremely cooperative.
Amazing reactions. So thank you everyone for contributing.
Thank you. It seems like there's a lot of great comments coming through in the chat too. So I'm glad that people got what they expected to get here today too. And again, feel free to share this recording with other folks in your network if they feel like, if you feel like they could benefit from it too. Just to flag, managementstudies.coop is our website, and we're on social media at co-op MGMT, co-op management, on several platforms where we try to share lots of information happening in the co-op sector, opportunities for events that are coming up and that type of thing. So I will make sure that everybody who registered does get an email, does get the recording. I know time zones can be tricky for some folks. So Nazik and I will stay on the line for another few minutes if anybody has questions or additional things you want to voice. Otherwise, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Great, lots of good chats coming in. Let's see. Oh, great. Someone shared that Jessica Gordon-Umbert's book on the history of Black co-ops in the US has also been made into a graphic novel. Oh, fantastic. Okay, wonderful. Unless anybody wants to voice a question, we will wrap up here. Make sure everybody gets the information by email. So thank you, Nazik. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take good
Thank
care.
you. Take care. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
I'm so late, but I would like to open the recording. Sorry.
Sure,
Thank
we'll
you.
make sure you get it. Thank you.
Thank you very
Take care,
much.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye, Erin. Thank you so much.
Thank you.